Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome to the World Over Live. A stunning decision at the Supreme Court on the Affordable Health Care Act. It will have far-reaching implications. We'll delve into many of them with you. Here to help us unpack and explain the health care ruling is the learned hand professor of law at Harvard University, ANN GLENDON. And later, Catholic League President Bill Donohue offers his take on the ruling and the lingering challenges to religious liberty. And finally, Congressman Jeff Fortenberry joins us to talk about the legislative aspects of the decision and what, if anything, Congress can do about it. If you'd like have a comment or if you have a question, drop us an email at worldover@ewtn.com. Let's get started. Here's the brief news from the world over this week. President Barack Obama's signature legislative achievement has survived Supreme Court scrutiny. In a 5-4 ruling, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld most of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. Chief Justice John Roberts joined Justices Breyer, Ginsburg, Sotomayor, and Kagan in the majority opinion. The 5 ruled that the individual mandate requiring individuals to purchase health insurance or pay a fine is constitutional. The justices argued that the mandate is actually a tax penalty within Congress's power to enact. Ironically, throughout the push for the health care law, President Obama insisted that the individual mandate fine was not a tax. The court rejected arguments that the health care law is constitutional under the Commerce Clause and Necessary and Proper Clause. The court also rejected a portion of the law that required the expansion of states' respective Medicaid programs as a violation of states' rights. More on all of this in our next segment. And Egypt's newly elected president, Mohamed Morsi, met with Coptic Orthodox and Catholic leaders this week, seeking to assure them that Christians will not suffer under his presidency. The election of the Muslim Brotherhood leader has raised grave concerns among the Christian minority, who fear continued persecution and the Islamicization of Egypt. President-elect Morsi told the Coptic Orthodox delegation that he would not allow anyone to condescend to the Christian population. Bishop Jonas Zakari told Aid to the Church in Need that he is taking a wait-and-see approach with the new president. Meanwhile, through a spokesman, Morsi said he will appoint 2 vice presidents. One would be a Coptic Christian, the other a woman. And Queen Elizabeth II's Diamond Jubilee continued this week in Northern Ireland. In between the pomp and celebration in Belfast on Wednesday, the Queen and former Irish Republican Army commander Martin McGuinness shared a handshake of peace. The long-awaited encounter symbolized the reconciliation in Northern Ireland after decades of violence. Deputy First Minister McGuinness and the nationalist Sinn Féin party had never before attended a royal function. They enjoyed an art gallery tour with the Queen and tea and coffee. See, peace is possible. On Tuesday, the Queen visited a Protestant and Roman Catholic church in the town of Enniskillen. The town was the site of the Remembrance Day bombing of 1987. The IRA terrorist attack killed 11 and drew widespread condemnation. The event was seen as a turning point in the Troubles. Cardinal Sean Brady was among the many who welcomed Queen Elizabeth at St. Michael's Catholic Church. And the U.S. Bishop's Fortnight for Freedom campaign for religious liberty continues and may have just become much more important. This past weekend, EWTN cameras were on hand in the nation's capital for the Washington Archdiocese Celebration of Freedom. Thousands were on hand in prayerful celebration of America's heritage of religious liberty. Cardinal Donald Wuerl offered his own reflections.
Today we're simply reminded, as we look back over our history and we look at our freedoms, that there are some things worth standing for. There are some things worth getting up for. And religious liberty is one of them. My brothers and sisters, we simply need to stand. To stand for what is right, to stand for what is ours, to stand up for religious liberty. Thank you.
EWTN's coverage of the Fortnight for Freedom continues on July 4th with a Mass from the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception here in Washington. Philadelphia Archbishop Charles Chaput will be the celebrant, with Cardinal Wuerl providing the homily. You don't want to miss that. The Mass starts at noon Eastern and will be followed immediately by a special Independence Day world over. And in Rome, Pope Benedict this week has reassigned a top curial prelate to a newly created post within Ecclesia Dei. That's the pontifical commission charged with pastoral care of traditionalist Catholics and facilitating full communion with the Society of St. Pius X. American Archbishop Augustin Donohue, a top Dominican theologian and the #2 man at the Congregation on Liturgy, was appointed vice president of Ecclesia Dei. Cardinal Leveda is the president. According to a Vatican statement, this appointment of a high-ranking prelate is a sign of the Holy Father's, quote, strong desire for the reconciliation of those traditionalist communities not in union with the See of Peter. And a few other appointments of note. Replacing Archbishop Donohue as the new secretary of the Congregation for Divine Worship is Bishop Arthur Roach from Leeds, England. Now, most of us are already familiar with his work. Archbishop Roach was chair of the commission that produced the latest English translation of the Roman Missal heard at Mass. Italian Archbishop Vincenzo Paglio has been named president of the Pontifical Council for the Family. He succeeds Cardinal Ennio Antonelli, who is retiring. And America's first televangelist is a step closer to sainthood. Announced Thursday, Pope Benedict declared Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen as venerable. Archbishop Sheen was best known for his Emmy Award-winning program Life is Worth Living. Archbishop Sheen was ordained a priest in Peoria, Illinois, and later became Bishop of Rochester and an auxiliary in New York. He passed away in 1979. The papal recognition of Archbishop Sheen's heroic virtues paves the way for his possible beatification, the last formal step before sainthood. And also announced as venerable by the Congregation for the Cause of Saints, Bishop Alvaro del Portillo, the successor of Saint Jose Maria Escriva as head of Opus Dei. Bishop del Portillo led the lay movement when it was established as a personal prelature by Pope John Paul II. He was a close, intimate friend of the Pope as well as Saint Jose Maria Escriva. And finally, the world has turned its gaze upon Bethlehem, but not for the reasons one might wish. The Church of the Nativity has become the center of a political fight at the UN Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, better known as UNESCO. The Palestinian Authority, the newest member of the United Nations cultural arm, over the objections of the U.S. and Israel, is aiming to obtain World Heritage status for the birthplace of Jesus. The effort is seen by some as a ploy to boost Palestinian legitimacy and global recognition in a larger effort to push for a Palestinian state. An Israeli spokesman criticized the move as a political hijacking of culture by the, quote, Palestinian propaganda machine. The U.S. had earlier weighed in against Palestinian recognition with UNESCO by yanking $80 million from its fund, nearly a fourth of the budget. UNESCO could decide the Church of the Nativity matter this week at its meeting in St. Petersburg. When we return, Mary Ann Glendon is here. She'll react to the big Supreme Court health care ruling. How will it affect you? And later, the religious liberty dimension of health care with Bill Donohue. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. The Supreme Court has ruled on the constitutionality of the administration's health care law. The individual mandate in the law will stand. To help us unpack this monumental decision is the former ambassador to the Vatican and the learned hand professor of law at Harvard University and the newly appointed member of the U.S. Commission for International Religious Freedom, Mary Ann Glendon. Great to see you, Marianne.
It's always a pleasure.
Thank you for coming out. And you were sworn in today. You were at the court while this great unveiling took place.
I was.
What was it like up there?
It was pandemonium.
And you went in and out the back door, though. You got around the mayhem. Now, here's my question. When is a mandate only raising a tax? Is it only when John Roberts and company says it is? I mean, can you unpack this reasoning for me?
Well, as we know, the law was held constitutional, and it was held constitutional on a ground that surprised us all. The Supreme Court, in its wisdom, 5 judges in their wisdom, decided that this penalty, as it was called in the statute, was really a tax, and so thus constitutional under the Congress's power to tax and spend.
Yeah.
But Raymond, I think this decision that has disappointed so many people has some thorns in the bouquet that was handed to the administration. And first and foremost, in the very first paragraph of the decision, Chief Justice Roberts says, we are not ruling on the soundness of this law. We are not saying this is a good law. We're not saying this is a wise law. All we're saying is that it's constitutional. And there's a long tradition in the American judiciary of judges like Oliver Wendell Holmes, who had a very strict conception of the judge's role, not to pass on the wisdom of legislation, but on its constitutionality. And I think that's the way Chief Justice Roberts sees himself, whether we agree with him or disagree with him.
As sort of a dispassionate, someone who can build bridges in the court, bring a sense of consensus out. Is that, I mean, is this with an eye to history and how it will remember the Roberts Court?
Well, nobody can see into the mind and heart of Justice Roberts, but I do think that he sees his role, as he said when he was in his confirmation hearings, as an umpire. But let's come back to the thorns in the decision. So first of all, he's not telling us it's a good law. And in fact, we know that it is a law that shamefully was passed by Congress without reading it. That is really the scandal here, is that the political branch really let us down on this law. And so here we are stuck with a bad law, and the solution to a bad law is to repeal it and replace it. And we do need to replace it because our healthcare system is in trouble. We have a strain on Medicare and Medicaid and the Social Security system that arises from an aging population and
more people qualifying for Medicaid in some of these states. States are bankrupt. I mean, you've got double the people in places like Colorado, Texas. In the last 10 years, they've doubled the number of Medicaid applicants, and people who are eligible, they simply don't have the money.
Absolutely. So in this opinion, you have this idea that what we thought was a penalty is really a tax. That's quite an alarming word. And it's alarming when you put it in combination with something else that appears in the opinion, which is the statement that Medicaid is so greatly expanded under this act that it is no longer a program just to help the neediest and most vulnerable in our society. Now it is part of an ambitious universal health care program that is going to cost money. And what has not been discussed enough in this debate is, where is the money coming from? How are we going to finance the immense health care needs of an aging population?
I want to look at exactly what the Chief Justice wrote in this majority opinion, the one concerning the individual mandate. I'll share it with our viewers, put it up on the screen. He writes, construing the Commerce Clause to permit Congress to regulate individuals precisely because they are doing nothing would open a new and potentially vast domain to congressional authority. Congress already possesses expansive power to regulate what people do. Upholding the Affordable Care Act under the Commerce Clause would give Congress the same license to regulate what people do not do. Now, there are some commenters who look at that and say, What Justice Roberts has done brilliantly is close the door on the government using the Commerce Clause in this heavy-handed way to compel people to do something. Is that how you see it?
Well, the Commerce Clause is already very broad. Very broad, and I think many people thought that the Supreme Court could plausibly uphold the act under the Commerce Clause. It was a surprise that it was upheld as a tax. And again, I come back to the idea that in conjunction with the fact that now the focus is going to turn on what exactly does this law do,
right,
and how much is it going to cost, that word tax is going to set off alarm bells, because people have heard a lot about the great things the law is supposed to do. They haven't heard about the likely effect on the kind and quality of health care that is going to be available, especially for, again, the aging population.
Yeah. Yeah, well, when you're encouraging people to talk to hospice workers and deny themselves, you know, you have a board that's going to deny certain cares, procedures, tests to individuals, particularly in their moment of need when they reach old age. There are segments of this bill that they just have not been publicly scrutinized, much less scrutinized in this building behind us here. I want to share another little excerpt from the opinion. Justice Roberts writes, "Analysis suggests that the shared responsibility payment," he's talking about this individual mandate and the fines associated with it, that this payment may, for constitutional purposes, be considered a tax. So after saying, I don't know, it's not under the Commerce Clause, he then says, for constitutional purposes, it could be considered a tax. The payment is not so high that there's really no choice but to buy health insurance. The payment is not limited to willful violations, as penalties for unlawful acts often are, and the payment is collected solely by the IRS through the normal means of taxation. And so they allowed it to stand. Haven't they turned the IRS into an enforcement arm of health care?
Well,
or at least, not the Supreme Court didn't do that, but they've certainly given the constitutional nod to the IRS being used in this way.
Yes, but the IRS is used as an enforcement arm for other kinds of collection. That's not such a surprising feature of the statute. But there we are. It's squarely back in the realm of politics.
Yeah.
Not every bad law is an unconstitutional law.
Do you think that that's a good thing, that it's awakened people, particularly people of faith, Catholics, who, you know, you look at the pro-life breakdown. I got this from some staffers on Capitol Hill who went through the bill, and they remind us the abortion surcharge and secrecy clause, where you will be paying into your little cooperative $1 per person into an abortion kitty, an abortion fund, the HHS mandate, the possible funding of Planned Parenthood school clinics, participation in abortion, because there's no strong conscience protection in this bill. Is there a good side here, a silver lining in that the public is newly awakened to what's really here?
I think I would say there could be a good side. And that would not be a bad thing if we let go of the idea that every time we want to effect a political change in this country, we run to the courts and ask 9 unelected people to decide difficult questions. And by the way, Raymond, Congress is only too happy to shove difficult questions over to the courts. It would not be a bad thing if a decision like this reminded us, as the Catholic Catechism reminds us, that we have a responsibility to be active in the political sphere to the degree that we are capable of doing so.
Are you concerned when you read this ruling that some in Congress, some of the creators of this health care bill, the takeaway for them might be, anything we want to come up with, we'll just call it a tax and we can pass constitutional muster?
I am not concerned about that. I think tax is a radioactive word. Normally you would say the last thing you would want to do is call something a tax. Right. And in fact, the administration went to great lengths, as you know, to deny that this was a tax. Now it has been named as a tax, and I think that will cause people to focus on what this healthcare scheme is going to cost, who is going to pay, and how healthcare is going to be affected.
And indeed, John Roberts, in his opinion, he writes, and I thought it echoes the point you made. Members of this court are vested with the authority to interpret the law. We possess neither the expertise nor the prerogative to make policy judgments. It is not our job to protect the people from the consequences of their political choices.
That is John Roberts' political philosophy as he expounded it in his confirmation hearings. The role of the court is a limited role. We might disagree with the way he interpreted the statute and the way he interprets the Constitution.
But when you've got Justice Kennedy crossing the line, going to the other side, I mean, this could have gone 5-4 in either direction.
Yes.
John Roberts made a decision to
Yes.
take it in this direction.
Yes.
The question is, why? Is it personal? Is it looking to history? Or was he really convinced that this was the best way to go forward? Who knows? I mean, we'll never know. The ruling is the ruling, and there it is.
Right.
Talk about the Medicaid portion of this that is getting very little attention. This was where the states were being asked to broaden their Medicaid programs, and there were penalties attached without funding.
Yes, and I think when people start to read this very lengthy opinion and focus on that, they will see another thorn in the bouquet because, first of all, the majority names the changes in Medicaid, the expansion of Medicaid, as changing the whole program. This is no longer something for the poor. This is something else. And the court says, fine, but this is going to increase costs, and the states under the statute are being asked to pony up. But we, the majority, say they don't have to participate in this expanded version of Medicaid. And Congress may not penalize them if they don't. So they're taking away one of the elements of the Affordable Care Act that arguably made it affordable. I mean, there's a real question of whether it is affordable at all.
Right.
But this is not an unambiguous majority opinion.
The big question that we keep getting, the emails and the calls I've gotten since this Supreme Court ruling dropped, what happens to the HHS mandate lawsuits? People hear mandate, they get confused.
Yes.
Individual mandate, HHS mandate, they're two separate things, and the court wasn't ruling on the HHS mandate, the contraceptive mandate, at all.
Not at all. The lawsuits challenging the HAS regulations under the Affordable Care Act will go forward, and I think those lawsuits have every chance of success. EWTN is a plaintiff.
That's right. No, our CEO, Michael Warsaw, today said, we're going to take this fight forward, and the Becket Fund is representing EWTN and many of the schools and some of these Catholic schools and Christian schools associated and affected.
The Becket Fund is very hopeful, as are the bishops' lawyers. They're very hopeful that these suits challenging the HHS mandate will succeed under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act.
Do you believe that that's an accurate opinion?
Absolutely.
Given what we're seeing coming from the Supreme Court?
These are very strong suits, and we had just recently a unanimous decision from the Supreme Court in the Hosanna Tabor case, which involved the ministerial exemption. So I think that
it was a majority. It was 9-0, right?
It was unanimous.
Yeah.
It was a remarkable victory, again, for the Becket Fund. I have to say that because I'm chairman of the board.
That's right.
Of the
You're on the
Becket
board
Fund.
over there.
So,
is there anything ANN GLENDON isn't doing? That's my question. International religious freedom. She's been Vatican ambassador. You're at the Harvard Law School. You're President Obama's law professor.
Well, let's not go into too much detail.
Well, I'm just trying to lay out the whole resume here, Marianne. I want to take you off this for a moment. Now that you're focusing on international, because we may question how he got to think that he could get away with this.
Yeah,
who taught him about
I take
these?
the Fifth Amendment.
Okay. I'm not going to probe too deeply there. You are now looking at, you are now working on international religious freedom. As part of the Bishop's Fortnight, they've been focusing on the threats here in the United States to religious liberty. But abroad, we are seeing a breakdown in places like Nigeria, Egypt, all throughout the Middle East, Syria. What is your takeaway as you enter this new position?
I have to say, Raymond, that as I get more and more involved with international religious freedom, and I realize what a strong voice and presence the United States has had in defending religious freedom worldwide, it concerns me greatly that here at home, because of increasing threats and inroads and assaults on religious freedom domestically, we could lose credibility internationally. What if the Pew Forum and other groups that do these scorecards of religious freedom around the world, what if the United States shows up as
on a country of concern?
Country of concern. And I think really this Fortnight of Freedom is essential to remind us that we have a model of religious freedom in this country that has enabled persons of all faiths and no faith to live together and to flourish. And that model is under assault. That model, by the way, is what Pope Benedict calls positive secularism, a secular state that is open to and accommodating to all faiths with reasonable restrictions for public health and safety. He contrasts that with negative secularism that comes down to us from the French Revolution and that is hostile to religion, that drives religion into the private sphere and thus leaves you with non-religion established as the official religion. We don't want to go there. But that's the battle that the bishops are calling to our attention in this Fortnight for Freedom.
Very good. Mary Ann Glendon, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
I hope you'll come more frequently.
I'd love to.
When you have your meetings, when you're convening the International Religious, what is it called? Commission on International Religious Liberty meetings, or for the Beckett Fund, drop on by.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you, Raymond.
For more on the work of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, visit uscirf.gov. Up next, what effect will this decision have on the religious freedom of Catholics and Catholic institutions? And what are the threats beyond health care? Catholic League President Bill Donohue joins us in a moment, and later Congressman Jeff Fortenberry on the congressional response. The World Over Live continues in moments.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. Now that the Affordable Care Act has been upheld, what will this mean to people of faith and religious institutions? And what other religious liberty threats loom on the horizon? Here to talk about it all is the president of the Catholic League, Bill Donohue. He joins us from New York. Hey, Bill.
How you doing?
Now, let's start with your general impression of this ruling, and what does it mean to people of faith?
Well, it means that, first of all, our major concern, which is that of HHS, Health and Human Services, that they're going to tell Catholic nonprofits that they have to pay for abortion-inducing drugs and other things, that's still on the table. The only way we would have won on that is if they had gutted the entire Obamacare legislation. The fact that they didn't do so means that that's still alive. Now, there are a couple of glimmers of hope in this kind of abysmal day for us. Number one, the Obama administration has apparently reopened conversations with the bishops on expanding the religious exemption. If that happens, maybe some of our worst fears will be allayed. I don't know. Number two, in the majority opinion, they did make reference that you can't do anything in terms of pursuing the health care mandate that is unconstitutional. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, in her own points, was even more direct. She made it very clear that while the Congress has the authority to make certain that individuals have to basically purchase health care insurance, they cannot do so by doing things which are unconstitutional, such as, and I'm paraphrasing, such as freedom of religion. So it was in her bonnet, so to speak. She understood that the Obama administration, after the Supreme Court had agreed to hear this case, through the HHS mandate, was in fact threatening religious liberty. She seems to have understood that. I guess what I'm saying is this. Our biggest concern, which is the religious liberty of Catholics, that is still on the table. It's still very much alive, a live wire, but it's also a message to the Obama administration, don't push your luck on this. because you may very well run up against a brick wall with the people like Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Because these HHS cases, all of these lawsuits, they move forward, they continue. So we haven't heard the last of all of that. So it's an interesting point you raised from Ginsburg's dissent and the majority opinion in the other case. The bishops today, Bill, they issued a statement, and I found it peculiar. It said they're taking no position on the ruling. What would you advise them? They then point out that they've long supported universal health care, and they say, look, we have problems with the abortion funding, immigrant families aren't covered under this, and they said there's no conscience protections in the bill. Is in the middle of a fortnight, when you've been ringing the alarm for religious liberty, should they have taken no position on this?
It suggests to me, and I don't have any inside information, what it suggests to me is that perhaps the bishops understand, since the conversations are ongoing, that if you start slamming Obama now, how in the world are you going to get an expansion of the religious exemption to the point where it basically, we get what we want? Maybe prudence is the virtue that's operative here. It remains to be seen. Clearly, from where I'm standing, since we don't know that there will be any expansion of the religious exemption, and we still have this animus against religion, and Catholicism in particular, I'm a bit more wary. It is not uncharacteristic of the bishops to speak cautiously initially and then wait to see what the response might be on the other side so that they don't have egg on their face and leaving the door ajar. So I think that remains to be seen.
Let's talk for a moment. You mentioned it a moment ago, this definition of what constitutes a religious organization or a religious institution. This is one of the major points the bishops have raised, and it is one of the threats to religious liberty. Expand on that a bit.
Right. I mean, the number one concern of the bishops has not been, number two concern would be the requiring Catholic nonprofits to pay for abortifacients and the like. But the number one concern, trumping that, was the redefinition of what a religious entity is. And they borrowed the idea from the ACLU back in 2000 when they helped draft legislation in California, which essentially says this: a Catholic institution does not qualify as a religious exemption to the extent that it hires and serves people mostly of their own faith. Obviously, the effect of that is a catch-22. It's designed to basically collide the interest of the Catholic Church with the Constitution is now understood by the Obama administration. Catholic hospitals, social service agencies, and educational institutions, from elementary right through the college and university level, do hire people who are not Catholic. God knows they serve people in their social service networks and their hospitals who are not Catholic. That's one of the reasons why I'm so proud to be a Catholic, that we do not discriminate. And now the perverse situation here, it's literally pernicious, that the Obama administration wants to turn this on our head and say, because you don't discriminate, therefore you're not truly Catholic, so you have to be insular in order to qualify. See, I don't think they're going to win on this in the long run, but as long as the mindset is there to try and have this very narrow understanding of what qualifies as a religious exemption, the problems are going to remain. The problems would have remained, quite frankly, even if we had won today on Obamacare. But now it's even, the situation is more drastic than ever before.
Bill, reading the emails today, and there have been a lot of them, many people are throwing their hands up and they said, well, I guess we lost this. That's the end of the religious liberty thing. I guess we'll just go pray our rosaries in quiet now. What would be your message to them? And what are the other threats to religious liberty beyond this healthcare fracas?
Well, the biggest threat comes with the mindset again. Take a look what happened, and here again it's somewhat encouraging. The Obama administration, in the ministerial exception decision, Hosanna Tabor, they were basically saying that the government has a right to make employment decisions for religious entities. And in oral argument last fall, this woman Kruger, representing the Obama administration, in answer to Scalia and to Eleanor Kagan, she said, in essence, that there was no fundamental difference between a religious association and any other voluntary association. That's why they lost 9-0, by the way, because she didn't even reference the First Amendment. So what I'm saying is this: I don't think this thing is over by a long shot. First of all, there's the political downside to try and defend something which the American people don't want. But more importantly for us, what remains on the table is the constitutional question. Does the government have the right to declare a religion to be that which is an entity that hires and serves mostly people of its own faith. That kind of mindset bespeaks this idea, which the President of the United States has used, and so has Hillary Clinton. They believe in freedom of worship, which is an insular, privatized understanding of the First Amendment, which talks to freedom of religion, a much more public expression of religion. We're not going to be cabined. We're not going to be boxed in with this insular definition. So I would say to the people who are listening, don't get discouraged by this. We're going to fight this. And again, Cardinal Dolan has not ruled out, we'll see how it's going to flesh out eventually here, civil disobedience, because I can't imagine a lot of people cooperating with this. It's actually better to serve a higher law, the moral law, as Aquinas said and Dr. Martin Luther King said and the Catholic Catechism says, as opposed to prostitute your principles for the sake of politics.
Yeah, because as of right now, the fines are still in place. You have to comply as of next year. And if you don't, you either have to shutter your doors or pay these onerous fines, $100 a person per day. That's a lot of change.
They're either going to expand the religious exemption so that we don't have to go there, so to speak, or I suspect this will bubble itself up to the Supreme Court at some point. But remember what the majority opinion said. You can't, in the processing of this, you can't do anything that's unconstitutional. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she may not always be the most religion-friendly justice on the Supreme Court, but God bless her, she came out and warned them that if you're going to basically trump and violate the First Amendment right to freedom of religion, she also mentioned speech and the Due Process Clause, that's not going to be countenanced. So that, to me, is a big caution, a big warning sign to the Obama administration. If you go too far with this in terms of what you want, this may come back to haunt you. Yeah,
well you know, you mentioned it a moment ago. This, the question here is, even if they grant a religious exemption for these religious organizations, what about the Catholic or the evangelical owner of a business who doesn't want to provide abortifacients, contraceptive services, or sterilization services to their employees? What about their conscience rights? They're not going to be qualified as a religious organization. They're going to be subject to these fines.
Yes, I think they will be. And, you know, first of all, this whole conversation is really amazing. We never would have had it as recently as 5 years ago. We're asking for an exemption to be expanded regarding our First Amendment right to freedom of religion because we have an administration which regards freedom of religion as basically unimportant. Remember, they got this idea of what a religious entity is from the ACLU. When I interviewed Roger Baldwin in 1920, I'm sorry, I'm not that old.
You're not that old, Bill.
When I interviewed him in 1978 about the founding of the ACLU in 1920, I asked him, why is it that in your first 10 objectives for the ACLU, you cover freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of the press, but you didn't cover freedom of religion? He told me, very honestly, he said, Bill, because freedom of religion is not important. I'm an atheist. Well, there's a number of atheists and agnostics and thoroughgoing secularists in the White House today, and that's the fundamental problem. It's the thinking that's taking place in the White House from Sebelius and the president and down to the people at the bottom.
Bill, tell people some of the other stalking horses here regarding religious liberty, some of the things you're concerned about. I know there's this case at the St. Joseph Medical Center in Yonkers. Tell us about that and other things you're worried about.
Yeah, I mean, you have an example for, you know, the Defense of Marriage Act was passed in 1996. Only 14 senators were opposed to it. It was signed by a liberal president, President Bill Clinton. Everybody considered this to be normal. You shouldn't have to recognize same-sex marriages if you don't want to. That's up to the states. And then we have the President of the United States who put his hand on the Bible, yes, the Bible, and he said that he's going to enforce the Constitution because he's the main enforcer. He's the chief executive. Then he tells the Justice Department, I don't want you to enforce a law that was passed by the Congress, namely the Defense of Marriage Act. Now we fast forward to New York State, which instead of allowing, like other 32 states have, allowing the people to make their own decision as to whether or not they think two men should get married, they decided, the legislature, to have that decision to themselves without having a public hearing. Now we get to the situation where you have this lesbian woman who a couple of weeks ago, working at St. Joseph's Medical Center in Westchester, goes to a woman and says, listen, I'm married, I want to have health benefits for my spouse. And the woman says, fine. She says, oh, I want to let you know there's one little caveat here. My spouse is another woman. Of course, this was a setup just to exploit the Catholic institutions. This is the gay agenda to impose. We're accused of imposing? No. They're the ones who were imposing on us. They knew this would be caught up in a lawsuit. They want to challenge not on the state law, because they won on the state law. They want to challenge the Defense of Marriage Act, and that's what this whole thing is about. Wherever you see sexuality interceding and colliding with religious liberty, we found out from Kai Feldblum, a Georgetown University law professor who happens to have been appointed by President Obama to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. She said wherever you have a conflict between sexual rights and religious rights, sexual rights should win. Well, I find it she's right about one thing. That's where the conflict is. Sexual rights on abortion, on gay marriage and the like. But isn't it astounding that the Constitution of the United States says not a word about sexual rights? It does speak in the First Amendment about the right to religious liberty, and the First Amendment is supposed to take a back seat in the year 2012 to rights which are not in the Constitution? I mean, you know, if you came in from Mars and you're just trying to understand what the Constitution is all about, I can understand why you'd be thoroughly confused.
Bill, you know, in that case, what those people will say is, the lesbian couple there will say, hey, this is basic fairness. If I were a straight couple, I'd be able to share my benefits with my spouse. Why can't I, if I'm recognized in the state of New York as a married couple, why is the church and this institution discriminating against us?
Well, actually, what they're trying to do is to get the federal law involved, because they already won in the New York State. But, you know, there's always been religious exemptions. We're back to that question again. That we don't force religious institutions to prostitute their own doctrinal prerogatives for the sake of the political will master in Washington, D.C. And if religious entities are to be dismissed, if religious exemptions don't count, we're in a very scary times. I mean, I don't know where we're going to go with this. If you're going to do what the Obama administration wants to do, which is to treat every religious entity as if it was just one other kind of a secular voluntary association, you know, analogous to the Little League or something of that nature, then we're really in very, very deep trouble in this country. And remember, the President of the United States obviously appoints the Supreme Court justices. We have several of them in their 70s. And this issue, since the justices have become increasingly activist, even now at the federal level, not just simply at the circuit level, we've got a real problem on our hands.
Bill, before I let you go, your thoughts on the coverage of this Fortnight for Freedom the bishops announced. I mean, they have been having events, rallies, movie showings, processions, marches. It's gotten virtually no coverage on the national scene. Is this bias, in your opinion?
There's no other word for it. If you have 3 people from SNAP, the activist group out there, and protesting in front of St. Patrick's Cathedral, they're on the evening news. If you have, you know, hundreds of thousands of people show up for a pro-life march, they don't even show it at all. And if they call it at all, they call it an anti-abortion march. They never call it pro-life. Well, obviously, there's bias at work, and it reflects the bias of the people in the media. That's why they wouldn't allow the dreaded word Jesus to be mentioned on ABC News when Wellenda, the high-wire guy going across the Niagara Falls, was invoking the name of Jesus. They blacked it out. They always do it this way. Of course, we're dealing with bias. And, you know, it's very frustrating to most people who are people of faith. But the people in the media, just like the people in the academy, the ones who are the font of ideas in this country, tend to be thoroughgoing secularists. So, yeah, they don't want to hear what the people have to say. My only regret is this. I would have preferred one big, large event, making it more difficult for the media to ignore it, as opposed to being dispersed over 2 weeks in multiple places throughout the country. That's just a strategic move. But that certainly doesn't get the onus off the media's back.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting insight there. Bill Donohue from the Catholic League, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Up next, what is the move legislatively in the face of this Supreme Court health care ruling? And what about those conscience rights? Congressman Jeff Fortenberry of Nebraska will tell us. The world over continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. He is a member of the U.S. House of Representatives from Nebraska who has long been concerned about protecting Americans' conscience rights, particularly in healthcare law. Earlier today, he presided at a congressional forum at Georgetown University, of all places, called In Defense of Liberty, a bipartisan response to President Obama's HHS mandate. Here to tell us about it and give us his thoughts on what happens in Congress in the wake of the Supreme Court decision is Congressman Jeff Fortenberry. Right. Congressman, thanks for being back.
Good to see you.
Let's start with this forum. What was this forum and why Georgetown? Was Sharon Fluck there?
She didn't make it. I didn't see her in the audience. But I thought it was important to hold that discussion at Georgetown on the respect for rights of conscience and religious liberty. Georgetown, probably not by its own choosing, has become sort of an epicenter, if you will, for this debate. The president spoke there. We held the forum in the same hall where the president spoke. The Secretary of Health and Human Services, Kathleen Sebelius, spoke there about a month ago. And the Georgetown law student was the one who created quite a furor on Capitol Hill. So I thought it was appropriate to maybe provide a little balance and hold a bipartisan forum there on the deeper philosophical problem in the healthcare law as it erodes healthcare liberties, as it attacks the rights of conscience and religious freedom.
We mentioned that a moment ago with Bill Donohue, and he was talking about if we get this religious exemption, things will be better. But that doesn't solve the problem for the mom and dad who have a small shop or the people running businesses who maybe their consciences are being offended as well. What do we do for them in the light of this decision?
Well, that's one of the reasons that we wrote the bill called Respect for Rights of Conscience Act. It tries to go deeper than just carving out who the government allows not to be coerced into basically following this law. There's a deeper philosophical principle here that goes to the founding of our country that's been operative in our healthcare culture until this bill passed, namely that you shouldn't be coerced. You shouldn't be forced to choose by your government whether to obey the law or violate deeply held reasoned beliefs. This most perniciously, of course, affects faith-based institutions, the Catholic Church being one of them, which has a huge presence in health care, caring for the poor and vulnerable. But it also affects other people of goodwill who may object to certain drugs and procedures, having to pay for them in their health care plan as small business people. So we need to get underneath the principle here and not just carve out exemptions, basically submitting ourselves on bended knee to the government saying, please don't do this to us, but it's okay if you do that to them. It's better to have a deeper philosophical discussion about this principle.
Where does this Supreme Court majority ruling place this whole question of conscience rights? To my eye, just listening to the guests we've had on earlier, it seems the Supreme Court is saying, here's your blank check, call it a tax, and you can compel people to do whatever you'd like. I mean, isn't that what Kathleen Sebelius is doing? You have to provide these services. If you don't, here's a tax or a fine. Isn't that constitutionally protected?
The bill in its entirety now holds, which means that Secretary Sebelius's right to impose what she defines as preventative services, even though they violate the fundamental ethical sensibilities of many Americans, have to be obeyed. Now the emphasis shifts back, if you will, to the legislature, United States Congress, to either deal with this or not, or before the court is one set of lawsuits left that actually deal with this question as to whether or not this is a violation of a constitutional principle in of itself. It violates the intention of Congress in the Religious Freedom Restoration Act and other previous laws that have been upheld. All the Respect for Rights of Conscience law does, or bill that we've proposed, which has 224 co-sponsors, by the way, a bipartisan effort, because it's not about politics, it's not about partisanship, it's about principle. It restores the rights of conscience and religious liberty that were operative in our healthcare system and respected prior to this law.
Before this law passed. Your thoughts on, it seems everybody today, and I'm going to play the two presidential candidates here. Here is the president responding to the ruling. I want to get your opinion of what he said. Roll the tape.
I know there will be a lot of discussion today about the politics of all this, about who won and who lost. That's how these things tend to be viewed here in Washington. But that discussion completely misses the point. Whatever the politics, today's decision was a victory for people all over this country whose lives will be more secure because of this law and the Supreme Court's decision to uphold it.
What do you make of that? And is this good for him? I hate to drag out the political argument he was invoking there, but is this good politically for the president, having won what is no doubt a victory at the Supreme Court?
Well, first of all, let me clarify something. I didn't vote for this bill when it came before Congress because I think we need the right type of health care reform. But what we got instead was a massive 3,000-page or so bill that shifts more unsustainable spending to the government, that erodes fundamental health care liberties, that does things like cut Medicare. You've already seen costs going up exorbitantly for small businesses. The average family now is paying an extra $2,000 in costs, and that was to be resolved. The right type of health care reform would actually improve health care outcomes while reducing costs and protecting vulnerable people. There are much better ways to do this. So it's going to be a robust political debate. I don't know if the president's correct politically or not. I think that, again, the emphasis shifts back to the United States Congress as we debate this, and it's going to be completely caught up in the electoral cycle for the president.
That's what I mean. Even if you submitted this bill, you've got co-sponsors. This could go to the floor tomorrow. Right. Where's it going to go, Congressman Fortenberry?
Well, by our process, it would go to the Senate to die.
But yeah, Senator Harry Reid is not going to bring up this bill.
In fact, the Senate already heard this bill. We got a significant minority vote. 48 senators courageously voted for this, and we were pleased to see that. But look, the question now really does shift back to the American people. Do you want this law or not? And that's what our elections are going to be about.
Here's Mitt Romney, who made a similar case. Roll the tape.
As you might imagine, I disagree with the Supreme Court's decision, and I agree with the dissent. What the court did not do on its last day in session, I will do on my first day if elected President of the United States. And that is, I will act to repeal Obamacare.
Do you think this has put this issue of health care front and center in this presidential season?
Well, absolutely. I think it's a manifestation of a deeper philosophical divide as to how we're going to move forward as a country, how we define our narrative as a nation. Are we going to invest more authority, more power in Washington-based solutions, or are we going to devolve power, uphold what we call mediating institutions, family, faith, civil society, try to develop better market systems for more robust access to affordable health care products such as catastrophic insurance or not? Again, what this bill is shifting huge cost that we cannot afford, that we do not have the money for, to more government spending in order to fix the health care system. And at the same time, though, it's eroding health care liberties such as the rights of conscience.
30 seconds. Does this give a blank check to Congress telling them you can do anything, the American people will do whatever you want them to do. You can get them to buy any service so long as you call it a tax. Is that a dangerous precedent that this ruling sets up?
It's an interesting question that you raise as to whether or not that now is the legal pathway, the congressional pathway to do anything you want.
Very good. Congressman Jeff Fortenberry, thanks for being here. That is all the time we have, but the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Go to RaymondArroyo.com. The Twitter and Facebook pages are linked on the left-hand side of the site. Go like me on Facebook and follow me on Twitter. I posted some Supreme Court ruling analysis and news on both pages. Governor Romney was to join us this week, but due to scheduling conflicts, we had to delay our interview, which I trust will be coming shortly. It's a pleasure to try to inform and inspire and entertain you a little bit each time we're together. On behalf of the staff and crew, I'm Raymond Arroyo. Thanks for joining us. In the meantime, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. Bye now.